The purpose of this video is to help coaches, parents, and athletes understand the difference in training ranges between the two types of Raptors. Now, the reason it's very important to understand the differences between these two Raptor units is it's going to help coaches, athletes, and parents understand which of these two units is best suited to satisfy your training needs. Okay, now we're going to show you how you adjust the loaded training ranges to suit your needs of both the dual band Raptor unit and the single band Raptor EX units. The dual band Raptor shown on the left, as the name implies, has two 40-foot bands. And that system, the immediate loading training range is from 0 to 15 yards. In other words, we can load an athlete right from the fence or from a wall at 0 yards from the unit out to about 15 yards. When you configure it for the extended training range, the athlete is loaded from 5 to 27 yards for approximately a 22-yard loaded training range. On the right, we've got the single band Raptor EX, which has an 80-foot band, which is obviously twice as long as a 40-foot band, so as you might expect, it's got twice the range. So the immediate loading range of a Raptor EX is from 0 to 30 yards. In other words, you can load an athlete right at a wall, and from that wall he can go out 30 yards and remain loaded. If you want to max out the training range of the Raptor EX, its extended loading ranges from 8 to 53 yards to provide basically a 45-yard loaded training range. Now when you flip both these units around, you can see band 1 on the dual band Raptor has about 5 extra yards of cordage wrapped behind the unit, as does band 2. So you've basically got 10 yards of extra cordage wrapped behind the unit. On the Raptor EX, you've got a single band and you have about 8 yards of extra cordage wrapped around the back side of a Raptor EX. This extra cordage is what allows you to go from an immediate loading range to a max training range. And it's important that you know whenever you use a Raptor, you always unfurl these cords from behind the Raptor unit and let them hang freely to the left and right of the unit when it's against a wall or fence. Now, when you unfurl the two cords in the back of the dual band Raptor, you're going to have about 5 yards of cord sticking out the cam cleats on both sides. And when we unwind the Raptor EX cord, we're obviously going to have about 8 yards of cords hanging out that cam cleat. Now, to configure the dual band Raptor for immediate loading, you're going to pull both the cords on either side of the cam cleats until you start seeing the cords get tight between the Raptor and the movable pulley units. When that happens, the athlete's going to be loaded right at the unit. And we're going to use the upper animation highlighted here to illustrate this case, where you've got the athlete loaded right at the unit. For this configuration, the athlete's going to be able to move about 15 yards away from the unit before resistance starts increasing exponentially. And the athlete's going to remain inside that 15-yard training range when they conduct their training. Now, if you want to maximize your loaded training range, what you're going to do is you're going to take that left and right side cord coming out of the cam cleats and pull them toward you. And then you're going to grab the two ends that attach to the athlete and walk away from the unit. As you do that, you're going to see the left and right side cords get drawn into the unit. Both cords are basically going to be about 5 yards away from the unit now, and they're going to be slack. And when the athlete attaches themselves to these cords, they won't actually be loaded until they're more than 5 yards away from the unit. We're going to use this lower animation to illustrate this case where the cords have been drawn into the unit and extend 5 yards from the unit. And at about 5 yards is where the athlete's going to be loaded once they attach themselves to the cords and take 1 or 2 steps. From that point, the athlete can move about 22 yards before resistance starts increasing exponentially. And when you compare these two distances, you can now see that we've basically added 7 yards to the loaded training range by utilizing the additional cordage that comes in the back of the unit. Now let's take a look at the Raptor EX. If you want to configure this system for immediate loading, you're going to extract the band out of the left side cam cleat until you feel it getting tight, at which time you're going to see the cord here between the Raptor and the movable pulley system get tight. At that point, the athlete's going to be loaded right at the unit. And we're going to use the upper right hand animation to illustrate this configuration where the athlete is loaded right at the unit. And when you walk away from the unit in this configuration, the athlete's going to go about 30 yards before they feel that exponential increase in resistance. And again, the key is you stay in that 30-yard range when you're training, and you're going to have a very smooth, consistent resistance that will allow you to do a lot of acceleration, deceleration work without destabilizing the athlete when they change direction. Now, if you want to maximize your loaded training range on the system, what you're going to do is you're going to grab the left side cord and pull it out of the cam cleat, and then you're going to grab the part that attaches to the athlete and walk away from the unit. As you walk away from the unit, the excess cord is going to be drawn into the unit, and when you're done, the cord is going to extend about 8 yards in a slack condition, and the athlete won't become loaded until they're about 8+ yards away from the unit. We're going to use the lower right hand animation here to illustrate this configuration where the cord has been drawn up into the unit, and now you've got a slack cord that runs about 8 yards away from the unit. When the athlete attaches themselves to the end of that cord, all they have to do is take 1 or 2 steps, the cord's going to tighten up and they're going to be loaded. From that position, the athlete's going to go approximately 45 yards before the resistance starts increasing exponentially. And the key here is to train in that 45-yard range before the resistance starts increasing exponentially. So basically that extra 8 yards of cord has allowed us to extend the training range about 15 yards from 30 to 45 yards. Now we're going to demonstrate this with actual photos to give you a better idea of how this is done. So let's look at the dual band Raptor. When you configure the dual band Raptor for immediate loading, you're going to extract both bands out the left and right side cam cleats until you feel them start getting tight. When that happens, you're going to have about 5 yards of extra cordage on either side of the Raptor system, and you're going to feel a load immediately when you grab the clips that attach to the athlete. So here we have a side view animation of this configuration where basically resistance starts at 0 yards away from the Raptor. In this specific case, you're going to have 5 yards of extra cordage now because all that extra cordage is extracted through the cam cleat, and you're going to drop a cone here to mark your starting point. Basically, you want to keep your training on the left side of that cone where you have resistance. Now when you walk away from the unit, once again, you're going to see around 15 yards. Resistance is going to start going exponential around 15 yards. And that's where you want to drop a reference cone, indicating to the athlete to stay on the right side of that cone. If they go on the left side of that cone, they're going to be training in an area where the resistance changes quite a bit from step to step. And usually for explosive training where balance is required, you don't want to be in that range. So basically the athlete wants to stay on the right side of that far cone and on the left side of the cone that's near the Raptor. When they stay between those two cones, they're going to get a very consistent training load in that 15-yard range, which is going to allow them to do very, very complex high-speed acceleration, deceleration drills that require a lot of balance. Now, if you want to configure the dual band Raptor for maximum loaded training range, what you're going to do is you're going to pop the cords out of the cam cleats, and then you're going to grab the two cords that attach to the athlete and walk backwards. As you walk backwards, the cords that are coming out of the cam cleats on both sides of the unit are going to be drawn into the unit. If you look at the right photograph, the cords are eventually, the rubber stoppers are going to actually hit the cam cleats. When that happens, you want to push the cord backwards and lock them into the cam cleats. And once you do this, you've basically got this situation where you've got two slack cords coming out at about 5 yards. The tail end of both cords have both been drawn up into the cam cleats in this configuration for max training range. And you've got a cone here on the right that you place near the athlete. When they hook up to it and step away, the bands are going to get tight, and that's where you want to place that cone. So now we're going to add another Raptor unit, and we're going to configure it for the max range configuration here by extracting the cords out. Then we're going to normalize the position of this second Raptor unit configured for max range so that the resistance lines up with the start resistance of the previous example. So we got to shift it about 5 yards behind the first Raptor system. And now we're going to put a cone here. We want to put a cone there because if you're on the right side of that cone, you got a slack band. If you're on the left side of that cone, you're going to have a band that's got tension in it, and that's where you want to do all of your resisted training, on the left side of that cone, because you do not want to do explosive training with a slack band. You always want to be loaded when you initiate your explosive movement. Now, when you move away from this system, you're going to find at about 22 yards, resistance starts increasing exponentially, and that's where we want to drop our second cone. And again, that lets us know that if we go beyond that cone, we're going to have a pretty significant resistance change on a step-by-step basis. If we stay on the right side of that far cone and on the left side of the cone near the Raptor, we're going to get a very consistent load through that 22-yard range. And if you look now and compare it with the previous example, you can see that we basically extended the training range by about 7 yards by utilizing those 5 additional yards of cord that come right behind the unit on each band. Now let's look at the Raptor EX system. To configure the Raptor EX for immediate loading, you're going to do basically the same thing you did with the dual Raptor, but only with one band. You're going to extract the cord out the left cam cleat until you feel loading right at the unit of the fence or at the wall. As soon as the athlete attaches themselves to that, they're loaded. And you're going to also notice the 8 yards of additional cord you have will be laying on the ground next to the unit. So here we have the immediate loading configuration. And you can see we've got 8 yards of extra cord now hanging outside the unit, and the athlete's loaded at 0 yards. Now as you move away from the Raptor EX, you're going to be able to go about 30 yards before you feel this exponential increase in resistance, which is twice as far as a dual band Raptor, which you might expect because it's an 80-foot band as opposed to 2 40-foot bands. And you're going to drop your cone there so the athlete knows if they go past the cone, they're going to have a large change in resistance from step to step. If they stay on the right side of that cone and on the left side of the cone near the unit, they're going to have a very consistent resistance through a 30-yard training range. If you want to extend that 30-yard training range, what we do to configure the Raptor EX for maximum loaded training range is we're going to pop the cord out of that cam cleat on the left-hand side. We're going to grab the part of the cord that attaches the athlete and walk away from the unit. As we walk away, those 8 yards of cord are going to be drawn into the unit to the point where the rubber stopper hits the cam cleat. At that point, just as with the dual band Raptor, you push the cord backwards so it locks into the cam cleat, and now you're going to have this situation where you have about 8 yards of cord away from the unit that's in a slack condition, and you've got the tail end of the cord, as you can see there, pulled up into the cam cleat. And now the athlete, when they attach to the Raptor system, is going to have a load when they're about 8 yards away from the system. So we're going to add a second animation here to show you the max range training configuration where the cord has been taken up into the unit and the tension starts about 8 yards away from the unit. We're going to normalize the position of this unit again, push it back about 8 yards so that the tension is starting equivalent to the 0-yard position in the previous case. We're going to drop a cone here. Again, we don't want the athlete training on the right side of that cone because you're going to have a slack band. As long as the athlete conducts their training on the left side of that cone, they're going to have tension, which is what you want when you start your explosive movements throughout the complete explosive training movement. Now, when the athlete moves away from the system here, they're going to be able to go about 45 yards before they detect that exponential increase in resistance. At the point when you start detecting the resistance increase non-linearly, you drop a cone. Again, if the athlete passes a cone, they know they've got a large change in resistance on a step-by-step basis. If they stay on the right side of that cone and the left side of the cone that's nearest the Raptor unit, they're going to have a very consistent training range in that 45-yard range. And now when you compare the two systems, you can see using that extra 8 yards of cord allows us to increase the loaded training range from 30 yards to 45 yards. And this provides a tremendous advantage for all ground-based sports because now you can load an athlete, for instance on a football field, over a 45-yard range to and from the unit, but also from sideline to sideline. And this provides a huge training advantage for all ground-based sports because now on a football field, for instance, you can load an athlete over a 45-yard range at top speed, not only 45 yards from the unit, but sideline to sideline at diagonals. And now you can perform very sophisticated, very effective and efficient acceleration, deceleration drills to develop a much more formidable athlete when it comes to acceleration, deceleration, and pure speed.